On July 16th, 1054, three men walked into the largest church in the world, the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, during Saturday afternoon prayers. They walked straight past the praying clergy, up to the high altar, and placed a folded document on it. Then they turned, shook the dust from their feet in the doorway, a gesture taken straight from the Gospel of Luke, meaning, "Let this place answer for itself before God," and walked out. The document was a declaration of excommunication. It cast the Patriarch of Constantinople, the most powerful churchman in the Eastern Christian world, out of the church entirely. The three men who delivered it were not random fanatics. They were cardinals, sent directly by the Pope of Rome. Within days, the Patriarch retaliated. He convened his own council and excommunicated the cardinals right back, along with anyone who had helped them. This moment is usually given a single clean name: the Great Schism, the permanent split between what we now call the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And if you only know the headline, it sounds like a sudden, dramatic divorce. Two men, two documents, one afternoon, and Christianity broke in half forever. That telling isn't wrong, exactly, but it is dangerously incomplete. The truth is that 1054 wasn't really the cause of the split. It was the final paperwork on a divorce that had been happening, slowly, for the better part of 700 years. To understand why Catholics and Orthodox Christians still don't share communion today, you have to go back centuries before either side had even heard of the men involved in that afternoon at the altar. Let's start with geography, because geography is where almost every account of this split should actually begin. In 330 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine did something unprecedented. He moved the capital of the Roman Empire, not just the seat of government, the actual center of imperial life, away from Rome itself, eastward to a small Greek city called Byzantium, which he rebuilt and renamed after himself, Constantinople. For the next several centuries, there were effectively two Romes. The old one, in Italy, increasingly poor, increasingly besieged by invading tribes, increasingly irrelevant to imperial politics, and the new one, in the east, wealthy, fortified, the genuine seat of power. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire collapsed entirely. The last Western emperor was deposed by a Germanic chieftain, and Rome, the city, became, essentially, an outpost. The Eastern Empire, what historians now call the Byzantine Empire, didn't fall. It kept going, for another 1,000 years. This split mattered enormously for how Christianity developed, because Christianity's major leadership centers, what are called the five great patriarchates, Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, now existed on two sides of a political fault line that kept widening. The Western Patriarchate, Rome, lost the protection and infrastructure of imperial government. To survive, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, had to step into the power vacuum left by collapsing Roman administration. He became not just a religious figure, but, gradually, the only stable authority left in a crumbling Western world. Popes negotiated with invading kings. Popes organized the rebuilding of cities. Popes increasingly started acting like rulers because someone had to. Meanwhile, in the East, the Byzantine emperor never went anywhere. He still ruled a functioning empire, with a functioning bureaucracy, and the Patriarch of Constantinople operated inside that system, not above it. The Eastern model became what's called symphonia, church and emperor working in coordinated partnership, with the emperor holding real authority over church affairs. The Western model became something closer to a single religious authority filling a vacuum where the state used to be. You can already see the seed of the conflict. Two different patriarchates, evolving two entirely different relationships to political power for almost 500 years, while barely speaking the same language. Because that's the second major divide. By the 7th century, the Western Church conducted its affairs in Latin. The Eastern Church conducted its affairs in Greek. Most educated Westerners couldn't read Greek theology. Most educated Easterners couldn't read Latin theology. Entire generations of bishops on each side were having complex doctrinal disputes in two different languages, often working from imprecise translations, sometimes genuinely talking past each other without realizing it. Now add a third force, liturgical and cultural divergence. Over centuries, the two halves of Christianity developed visibly different ways of worshiping. The West used unleavened bread for communion. The East used leavened bread, and considered the Western practice almost a return to Judaism, a serious theological insult at the time. Western clergy could not marry. Eastern parish priests could. The West fasted on Saturdays during Lent. The East considered fasting on a Saturday close to forbidden. None of these differences, on their own, were earth-shattering, but they accumulated. Every council, every diplomatic meeting, every attempted reconciliation kept running into the same pattern. Two churches that increasingly looked, sounded, and operated like two different religions wearing the same name. Then came the issue that, more than any other single doctrine, came to symbolize the entire rift: 3 Latin words added to the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed, written in 325 AD and revised in 381, is the foundational statement of Christian belief, recited in churches across both East and West. The original Greek version states that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. Sometime in the 6th century, Western churches in Spain began adding a phrase, and the Son, in Latin, Filioque. The idea was to combat a local heresy, and it eventually spread through Western Europe, eventually being adopted at Rome itself by the early 11th century. To Western theologians, this seemed like a reasonable clarification. If the Son and Father are united in divine essence, the Spirit proceeding from both seemed theologically consistent. To Eastern theologians, this was something close to scandal, on 2 separate levels. First, doctrinally, many Eastern theologians believed Filioque distorted the proper relationship between the persons of the Trinity, threatening to make the Father and Son redundant as a single source. Second, and arguably more inflammatory, the change had been made unilaterally. The Creed was supposed to be the product of ecumenical councils, gatherings representing the entire Christian world. Rome had altered the universal creed of the universal church without consulting the other 4 patriarchates. To the East, this wasn't just bad theology. It was Rome behaving as if it alone had the authority to redefine Christian doctrine for everyone else, which is precisely the kind of unilateral authority the Eastern Church had never accepted. This gets us to the deepest fracture line of all, the one that, more than language or liturgy or a single Latin clause, made permanent separation almost unavoidable: the question of papal authority. From a very early period, the Bishop of Rome was given a kind of honorary primacy among the 5 patriarchs, rooted in the tradition that Rome was founded by the apostles Peter and Paul, and that Peter, according to the Gospel of Matthew, had been told by Christ, "Upon this rock I will build my church." Almost everyone in the early Christian world agreed Rome deserved respect and a kind of presiding honor. The dispute was over what that honor actually meant in practice. Rome increasingly understood it as supreme jurisdictional authority, the Pope as the final binding decision-maker over the entire Christian Church, East included. The Eastern patriarchates understood it as a primacy of honor among equals, first among equals, not a ruler over the other patriarchs, but a respected senior voice within a council of peers. This wasn't an abstract disagreement. It had concrete, recurring consequences for nearly 1,000 years before 1054. Popes claimed the right to overrule decisions made by Eastern Church councils. Eastern patriarchs pushed back, arguing no single bishop, including the Bishop of Rome, had unilateral authority over the universal church. Only an ecumenical council, representing the whole church together, could settle major doctrinal questions. There were earlier ruptures, real ones, that came before the famous one in 1054. The Photian Schism in the 9th century, an extended conflict between Rome and Constantinople over a disputed patriarch, and over Bulgaria's church jurisdiction, produced mutual excommunications that were eventually healed, but left lasting resentment on both sides. By the time the 11th century arrived, both churches had centuries of practice treating each other as suspect, overreaching, and theologically unreliable, which finally brings us back to 1054, and to 2 men whose personalities turned a centuries-old structural problem into a final, dramatic rupture. The first is Pope Leo IX, an energetic reformer trying to centralize and strengthen papal authority across the Western Church, partly in response to genuine internal corruption, but also expanding what Rome claimed to be owed in deference from everyone, including the East. The second is Patriarch Michael Cerularius, a proud and assertive churchman who, around 1052, had ordered the closure of Latin Rite churches in Constantinople that used unleavened bread for communion, deliberately reigniting the leavened bread dispute as a pointed challenge to Western practice. The immediate trigger involved a complicated dispute over Byzantine territory in southern Italy, where Norman conquerors were forcing Greek Rite churches to adopt Latin customs, while Cerularius was simultaneously closing Latin churches in his own city in apparent retaliation. Leo sent 3 legates to Constantinople to negotiate, led by Cardinal Humbert of Silva Candida, a brilliant but famously combative theologian who had already spent years writing polemics against Eastern practices. The negotiations predictably collapsed. By the time Humbert and his fellow legates walked into the Hagia Sophia and placed that bull of excommunication on the altar, Pope Leo IX had actually already died, weeks earlier, technically voiding the legate's authority to act in his name at all. It almost didn't matter. The document existed. The gesture had been made in public in the holiest building in the Christian East, during a service in front of witnesses. Cerularius's counter-excommunication, days later, made the rupture mutual and official from the eastern side as well. Here is what almost nobody at the time understood, and what makes 1054 such a strange historical pivot point. Contemporaries on both sides did not think they were witnessing the permanent end of a unified Christianity. Mutual excommunications between individual churchmen had happened before and been reversed before. Many assumed this one would eventually be patched up too, the way the Phodian rupture had been generations earlier. It wasn't, and the reason it wasn't has less to do with the actual document from 1054 and more to do with what happened 150 years later, an event that did more lasting damage to East-West relations than anything Humbert or Cerularius ever wrote. In 1204, soldiers of the Fourth Crusade, originally organized to recapture Jerusalem, diverted from their mission, laid siege to Constantinople, the largest and wealthiest Christian city on earth, and sacked it. Western Christian soldiers looted Eastern Christian churches. They desecrated the Hagia Sophia itself, reportedly placing a prostitute on the Patriarch's throne during the plunder, according to Byzantine chroniclers. Sacred relics were stolen and shipped back to churches across Western Europe. Many never returned. A Latin emperor was installed on the Byzantine throne, and Constantinople would not fully recover its independence or its former power for the rest of its existence. The Byzantine historian Nikitas Choniats, writing as an eyewitness, described the sack in terms of total horror and betrayal, framing it not as a political conquest, but as a religious atrocity committed by fellow Christians. This is the event that, more than the dueling excommunications of 1054, hardened the schism into something that felt unbridgeable. The theological dispute over Filioque and papal authority could, in theory, be discussed and negotiated. The memory of Western soldiers desecrating Constantinople's holiest church became something else entirely, proof to Eastern Christians that Rome's claims to spiritual authority could not be trusted, backed up by an act of literal violence against the Christian East. Several attempted reunions followed in subsequent centuries, most notably at the Council of Florence in 1439, where Eastern and Western delegates actually signed a formal act of union. It collapsed almost immediately once the Eastern delegates returned home, because ordinary clergy and laypeople refused to accept it. The trauma of 1204 ran too deep, and many Orthodox believers saw union with Rome as a greater threat to their identity than continued separation, even as the Ottoman Empire was actively closing in on Constantinople. So if you ask what actually split Catholic and Orthodox Christianity, the honest answer isn't a single event. It's a layered structure, built over roughly 9 centuries. A political split in the 4th and 5th centuries that gave the Western and Eastern churches fundamentally different relationships to secular power. A linguistic divide that left both sides increasingly unable to read each other's theology in the original. A slow accumulation of differing rituals and practices, each one small, each one a little more evidence to each side that the other had drifted from the authentic faith. A genuine and probably irreconcilable theological disagreement over a single Latin clause inserted into a shared creed. An even deeper and more consequential disagreement over what kind of authority the Bishop of Rome actually held, primacy of honor versus supreme jurisdiction, that never found resolution. A dramatic, symbolic, but not initially final rupture in 1054. And finally, a catastrophic act of violence in 1204 that turned theological disagreement into something closer to a wound. Today, the Catholic Church counts roughly 1.3 billion members worldwide. The Eastern Orthodox Communion counts over 220 million, spread across Greece, Russia, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and growing diaspora communities worldwide, the two churches share the overwhelming majority of their core doctrine: the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, the authority of Scripture, the sacraments, the apostolic succession of bishops, even most of the same saints from the first 1,000 years of Christian history, since the split happened after that shared history was already written. Several formal dialogues over the past 60 years have made real theological progress, and in 1965, Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras jointly nullified the mutual excommunications from 1054, a genuinely significant gesture, lifting that specific ancient curse. But the deeper structural questions: what authority does the Bishop of Rome actually hold over the universal church? And does the Nicene Creed mean what the West says it means, or what the East says it means? Those questions remain formally unresolved. Full communion has not been restored. The two churches that emerged from a single, unified early Christianity are still, after nearly 1,000 years, conducting a careful, respectful, occasionally hopeful, fundamentally unfinished conversation about whether they can ever fully come back together. Which means the document those three cardinals placed on the altar of the Hagia Sophia in July of 1054 wasn't really the cause of anything. It was a snapshot, a single afternoon, of a divide that had already been building for 700 years, and that, in some form, is still being negotiated today